Hi, this is Teddy. You're listening to Desmond Meade, President and Executive Director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, on the Two Broads Talking Politics podcast. If you like this podcast, please rate and review at ratethispodcast.com/twobroadstalkingpolitics. Go get your vaccine!
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly, and this is Two Broads Talking Politics. I am on today with Desmond Meade, who is the President and Executive Director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition and the author of the book, Let My People Vote, My Battle to Restore the Civil Rights of Returning Citizens. Hi, Desmond.
Hey, Kelly. How are you?
Great. So I am so excited to talk to you today. I have a lot of questions for you. I wanted to start by asking you, last October, I believe you were able to vote for the first time in the presidential election in 2020. Can you tell me a little bit just about how that felt and what that meant to you?
Thank you so much for that question. When I voted in August in Florida in our August primary, and that was the first time that I voted in over 30 years. But in November, it was my first presidential election ever. Wow. Right. And so those experiences was very, I should say dramatic for me, because I really did not expect the reaction that I had when I went up to vote. And I tell folks all the time that in August, when I was walking up to the voting location, I felt an overwhelming sense that I was actually walking on hallowed ground. And the reason why I felt that, because I thought about the blood that was shed on American soil just so people like me can have the right to vote. I thought about my ancestors who were hung on trees and bitten by dogs and murdered and sprayed with fire hoses. Just so I can have the right to vote as an African American. And I also thought about the blood, sweat, and tears that folks across the state of Florida poured into passing Amendment 4, which restored my right to vote. And so I felt that, the ground that I was walking on was, and what I was getting ready to do was very a special moment. And it was a very sacred act that I was getting ready to engage in. And then as I was actually voting, I was in the booth selecting my candidates of choice. I came to realize how, what I was actually doing was saying much more than just something political, right? That the act of voting was actually reaffirming my humanity. It was saying that that I exist and that I do count, my voice matters, and I have a say in the direction of my community, the direction of this country, and that was such an empowering feeling, that, literally reduced me to tears. And it pissed me off at the same time, because I thought about over 700,000 people in Florida who was not able to experience what I was experiencing simply because most of them was too poor to pay any legal financial obligations that the Florida legislature was requiring. And let me tell you, I walked out of there knowing that, I had to make a stronger commitment to fight for the right of every American citizen to be able to participate in our democracy.
That's so powerful. And it seems like such an important point to me. I think this conversation around restoring the right to vote often ends up being sort of a political discussion, a political fight. We need to get more people the right to vote because they're going to vote this way. But it seems to me this this thing you said about restoring people's humanity, their ability to influence what happens in their locale in the country is so important, and such an important way to reduce recidivism.
You are so right about that. Especially on the first point. Let me tell you, and I tell folks this all the time. If you're really a champion for democracy, right, then your fight is for everyone to be able to participate in it. The minute your efforts are only geared towards people who you think would vote the way you would want them to vote, or people who look like you, then that's not what democracy is all about. And so when we were in the Amendment 4 campaign, I would tell folks, listen, we're fighting just as hard for that person who wanted to vote for Donald Trump as we are for the person that wished they could have voted for President Barack Obama, right? Because at the end of the day, our democracy flourishes when everyone, in spite of our differences of opinion, in spite of the various backgrounds we may have, in spite of the different color of our skin or ethnicity, that our democracy thrives when we all participate in it. And anyone that's claiming to be a champion for democracy, right, must have that type of mindset.
So I think Florida politics always seems so opaque in a way to those of us outside of Florida. And I think it's so interesting that to get this done, to get Amendment 4 passed, because it was a constitutional amendment, took, I think, 60% of the vote. And anyone who follows Florida knows that often these are, very close margins on elections statewide. But this took 60% of the vote. So what does it take to organize in Florida? What does that look like? What did that look like on the ground to get enough people to understand the issue, to vote? How did you go about that to push to get Amendment 4 passed?
Well, it took a lot of headaches and heartaches. Let me tell you, it was not an easy task. I do believe Florida is probably the most difficult state in which to pass a citizens initiative. And that 60% threshold may not seem as much to some folks, but it is very tough to get 60% of the electorate to actually agree on something. But I think what laid the foundation for us to be able to be successful was the fact that we were an organic grassroots movement. There have been many times during the campaign when people will refer to our movement as a bipartisan or even a nonpartisan campaign. And I would reject both of those and remind folks that we were neither one of those, that we were an organic grassroots movement that welcomed and enjoyed bipartisan support. And the key difference is that instead of leading with the politics, we led with people, right? And so that enabled us to really establish a very strong base of grassroots volunteers across the entire state of Florida that reflected a broad base or broad cross-section, I should say, of diversity. And that proved to be a vehicle that powered us through to victory in November of 2018. And the other piece to that, too, was that our campaign was not focused on, tearing people down. It wasn't focused on scaring people into voting for our amendment, or it wasn't focused on division. But rather, our campaign was focused on love and connecting with people from all walks of life and all political persuasions along the lines of humanity.
So for listeners who may not have been following the story as closely, can you talk a little bit about where things stand now? You mentioned that there were still 700,000 Floridians who were unable to vote because of the financial difficulties that were imposed. Can you talk a little bit about what that meant? So the amendment said that people who had prior convictions could regain the right to vote, but what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, what the amendment said basically was that, unless a person was convicted of murder or felony sexual offense. Once they've completed their sentence, that they would automatically be restored their right to vote. And immediately after we passed that amendment, the Florida legislature decided, through, the urging of the governor, to draft what they call implementation language for Amendment 4. And within the drafting of the implementation language, they inserted a requirement that folks or returning citizens must first pay all of their legal financial obligations. And that means whether it's court costs, fines, fees, restitution, any legal financial obligations that was assessed at the time of sentencing must be thoroughly or completely satisfied before a person would be able to enjoy the benefits of Amendment 4 passed. Amendment 4 cleared the pathway for over 1.4 million people in Florida. However, when this piece of legislation was passed, it effectively blocked approximately 774,000 of the 1.4 million from being able or qualified to register to vote. And so, what we have done, my organization, Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, believing that wherever people see obstacles, we see opportunities. We rolled up our sleeves and we got to work, and we created a fines and fees campaign that sought to, number one, utilize the courts to get those legal financial obligations waived so people will be able to register to vote. And then the second prong of that campaign was to actually fundraise. And we were actually able to raise over $27 million to help people who are too poor to get rid of those legal financial obligations. And we ended up helping over 44,000 returning citizens remove those fines and fees. So if they wanted to, that they would have been able to register to vote.
And if listeners want to help out with that, are you still raising money so that more people can have the right to vote restored?
Oh, most definitely. We are constantly raising money, and we're also expanding the uses of our court system as well to help get those fines and fees waived. But there are plenty counties in which we don't have a court program to actually implement. And in those counties, we're definitely looking at, identifying individuals that need help with these fines and fees and helping to pay it off. And so folks can go to our website at www.floridarrc.com. And on our page, there's an opportunity for folks to donate to our fines and fees fund, as well as to our general operating expense fund as well. As we're going about, like right now, we're in the middle of a Free to Vote bus tour where we're traveling the entire state of Florida. We are interacting with people whose fines and fees we've paid and giving them their receipts for their records, as well as signing new people up for our fines and fees program so they can get processed through our system. And then in addition to that, we're also registering people to vote. This was something that we had planned to do even last year because, the work that we do is not dictated by elections. It's dictated by a need to help people restore their humanity and their citizenship, right? And so we have been planning this for some time, but it seems like it is a perfect campaign, particularly in response to just the overwhelming amount of legislation that we're seeing across several states in the country that seeks to suppress the vote. And so we're like, okay, if you want to try to suppress our vote, then we're going to respond to suppression with aggression, which means that we're going to more aggressively be out in our communities, registering people to vote, signing up signing them up for fines and fees, and eventually turning them out to participate in upcoming elections.
Recently, Georgia passed a set of voting restrictions that were terrible. And, it got a lot of uproar and a lot of pushback, but really only after it was signed into law. I know that Florida is considering tightening voting regulations. A number of other state legislatures are doing so as well. What should people be doing to really pay attention to these voting restrictions, to which voters they affect, and what can we do to push back on these?
The easy thing would be to tell folks to call their senators and their representatives of the state if they live in the state which these type of suppression laws are being considered. I know that we're actively, along with other grassroots organizations, engaging with corporations that do business in the state of Florida, and we're encouraging them to speak out against it. We're encouraging athletes and sports teams to speak out against it, not after the fact, but before this legislation becomes law. But one of the things that is kind of depressing or infuriating, if you may, is the fact that, you see a lot of these elected officials that they would care less about what the people think. And they've already been bought and sold. And, at the end of the day, they're going to do what they want to do. And part of that is because they don't have great expectations of people actually turning out and voting them out of office. One of the things over the years, and we've seen it with the exception of last election cycle, that, they've been severe levels of voter apathy throughout the country. And when we don't show up to vote, elected officials think that they can do whatever they want and with no consequence, without facing any consequence. And so what at the heart of what I would tell people to do, or the main thing I would tell people, is that when you're seeing this, not only do you speak out, but you have to become more engaged. It's not good enough that you're registered to vote and you're going to show up to vote, but you should try to register 10, 20, 50 people, get folks registered and get them turned out to vote. Because I think that if we vote en masse, we're able to get rid of these politicians that does not respect what democracy is all about. And we'll hopefully elect public servants that would listen to the cries of the people.
I hope so. Yes, I think everyone getting more engaged is important and would be really terrific. I wanted to ask, we're running toward the end of our conversation, but I wanted to ask too about your book. So you had a book that came out last fall. Can you tell us just a little bit about the book itself and how listeners can get a copy of it?
One of the main reasons why I wrote the book was because, I wanted to be able to give people some sort of inspiration. I know that, life is not rosy for everyone, right? And that we all, at some degree, form or fashion, face obstacles in our lives. And there are many of us that, like me, suffered from substance abuse addiction. There's a lot of folks that suffered from homelessness, or even folks that were incarcerated. And, I wanted really to send a message that no matter what situation we're in, no matter the type of obstacles that we face, that we still have an opportunity to overcome those obstacles and to do great things in our community, in our state, even in our country. And I really wanted to set myself out as an example, because if me, I was addicted to crack cocaine, I was homeless, I was, in and out of jail and prison. If my life could be turned around to eventually become one of Time Magazine 100 most influential people in the world, that means that everyone that reads that book have an opportunity to be great and to do great things, to be impactful. That's one. And the other thing was that I really needed people to know. One of the greatest things about Amendment 4, and I kind of touched on it earlier, was that, over 5.1 million people voted yes on Amendment 4. That we had 1 million more people vote for our amendment than for any candidate who ran for the governor of the state of Florida. And it was a broad cross-section of support. But one of the most beautiful things about that was those 5.1 million votes were not based on hate or fear, but rather they were votes that was based on love, forgiveness, and redemption. And that night in Florida, we showed the world and the state that love can, in fact, win the day, that we can accomplish great things in our community without having to tear each other down, without having to be fearful of each other, that we can come together as a people and connect with each other along the lines of humanity and do great things as a community and as a country.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for all of the work that you do. And thank you for speaking with me today. I will be sure on our website when we post this that we post links to your book so people can get it. It's a wonderful story.
That would be great.
Yeah. And also to the Florida, I'm going to forget all the Florida
Rights
Restoration Coalition so that hopefully people will donate to the terrific work that you're doing. So thank you so much, Desmond.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. And you have a great.
Yes, you too.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.